The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast metal bowl, its walls gleaming under the soft blue lights that hung from the ceiling. Hundreds of seats filled the space, each one shaped differently to fit the many alien species that called this place home. Today was Cultural Exchange Day, and the air buzzed with excitement from dozens of different worlds. Commander Jake Martinez sat in the human section, his dark eyes scanning the crowd below. His weathered hands rested on his knees, and his military uniform bore the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much war. Next to him, Lieutenant Lisa Brooks checked her data pad, making notes about the day's proceedings. She was young, maybe 25, with bright eyes that still held hope for peace between the worlds. At the center of the hall, a tall blue-skinned alien stepped forward. Ambassador Keth Vale of the Zephyrian Empire raised his forearms to quiet the crowd. His purple robes flowed around his thin frame, and his large black eyes gleamed with what looked like amusement. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Keth Vale began, his voice carrying easily through the hall's speakers. "Today I bring you entertainment from one of our newest members. The humans of Earth have provided us with their most cherished stories. Their legends and myths that have shaped their culture for thousands of years." A holographic projector hummed to life above the ambassador's head. The air shimmered, and suddenly a massive figure appeared, muscles bulging as he lifted what looked like an entire mountain over his head. The crowd gasped in wonder at the image. "This is Hercules," Keth Vole said, his voice dripping with barely hidden laughter. "According to human legend, this man could lift mountains, kill lions with his bare hands, and perform 12 impossible tasks. Observe how the humans believe their ancestors possessed strength that defies all known laws of physics." The image changed to show a warrior with bronze armor and a spear. And here we have Achilles, supposedly invulnerable to all weapons except for one small spot on his heel. The humans tell stories of this man defeating entire armies single-handedly. Laughter began to ripple through the audience. The insect-like Vexthera clicked their mandibles in what passed for amusement among their species. Their compound eyes glittered as they watched the display. The crystal beings called Solari rang out in harmonic tones that their translators converted to delighted giggles. Jake's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Lisa noticed his hands slowly forming fists, but she said nothing. She had worked with the commander long enough to know when he was fighting to control his temper. "But wait," Kethvel continued, clearly enjoying himself now. "There is more. The humans also tell tales of warriors from the cold north, men who could enter a battle rage so fierce that they felt no pain and feared no death. They called these warriors berserkers and claimed they could fight even after receiving wounds that would kill any normal being. The hologram showed rough men with wild hair and crude weapons, their faces painted with blue symbols. They charged across a battlefield, screaming at the top of their lungs. Fascinating, is it not?" The Zephyrian ambassador asked the crowd. "A species that knows its own physical limitations, yet creates elaborate fantasies about superhuman strength and endurance. It speaks to a deep psychological need to imagine themselves as more than they truly are." More laughter filled the hall. An ambassador from the gas giant dwelling Fluxy spoke up, her voice a series of whistles and pops. "Are you saying humans actually believed these stories were real?" "Oh, but they did," Kethvo replied. "And some still do. Even today, human children are raised on these tales. They are told that their ancestors could perform miracles through sheer force of will." The ambassador gestured, and the hologram changed again. Now it showed modern humans in gymnasiums and training facilities, attempting to recreate the feats of their legendary heroes. A man strained to lift weights that barely moved. Another tried to break boards with his bare hands and succeeded, only in hurting himself. A group of athletes ran a marathon, collapsing in exhaustion long before the finish line. "As you can clearly see," Kethbell said, his voice filled with mock sympathy, "the reality is quite different. Modern humans can barely manage what any average member of our species considers routine physical activity. Their strength is limited, their endurance poor, and their pain tolerance among the lowest in the galaxy." The Vextora ambassador stood up, her insect body towering over the other delegates. "This explains much about human psychology," she said, her voice buzzing through the translators. "They compensate for their physical weakness with elaborate fantasy narratives. Indeed, agreed the Solari representative, his crystalline form pulsing with soft light. We have observed this pattern in several primitive species. The weaker the individual, the more grandiose their heroic myths become. Jake's knuckles had gone white now, and Lisa could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. She leaned over and whispered, "Commander, are you all right?" He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the holographic display, which now showed a comparison chart. Human physical capabilities appeared in red bars next to those of other galactic species. In every category, strength, speed, endurance, reaction time, humans ranked near the bottom. The evidence is overwhelming, Kethville continued. Humans possess no natural armor like the Vexthera, no enhanced musculature like the Garati, no environmental adaptations like the Aquari they are, by any objective measure, among the most physically limited species in our galactic community. An elderly delegate from the Mentari Collective raised a tentacled arm. But surely their technological achievements compensate for these limitations. To some degree, the Zephyrian admitted, human technology is adequate. Though hardly revolutionary, their weapons are functional, their ships serviceable. They have proven capable of basic interstellar travel and communication. However, their military capabilities remain questionable. The ambassador pulled up another display, this one showing comparative military statistics. During the recent border conflicts, human forces required significantly more support than other coalition members. Their casualty rates were higher, their mission success rates lower. This is hardly surprising, given their physical limitations. A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Many of the delegates nodded their various heads, appendages, and sensory organs in understanding. What I find most interesting, Kethville said, warming to his subject, is how humans have convinced themselves that these limitations are actually strengths. They speak of something they call the human spirit, as if possessing a weak body somehow grants them superior willpower. The laughter was louder now, and some delegates began making jokes among themselves. The Fluxy ambassador whistled something. That translated as a comment about how humans probably told stories about flying without wings. Next, in conclusion, Kethville said, raising his voice to reclaim attention, I propose that we formally document humanity's tendency toward mythological thinking as a species trait. This will help us better understand their decision-making processes and cultural outputs going forward. Several delegates voiced their agreement. The motion was quickly seconded and put to a vote. It passed overwhelmingly, with only the human delegation abstaining. As the session moved on to other business, Jake continued to sit in silence. The other delegates had already forgotten about the presentation, moving on to discussions of trade agreements and territorial disputes. But Jake's mind was elsewhere. Traveling back through years and across light years to a small planet called Kepler-44 to be dot, he remembered the red dust that got into everything. The way the twin suns cast double shadows across the battlefield, and the faces of 11 soldiers who had followed him into what everyone knew was certain death. Most of all, he remembered the look in the Zephyrian commander's eyes when the shooting finally stopped and the fortress fell. Lisa noticed that her commander's hands had finally relaxed, but his expression had grown distant and sad. She had seen that look before, usually late at night when Jake thought no one was watching. It was the look of a man carrying ghosts. The session ended with the usual formal pleasantries. Delegates began filing out of the hall, chattering among themselves about the day's revelations. The human myths had provided excellent entertainment, and several species were already planning their own presentations about primitive cultural beliefs from their home worlds. Jake finally stood up, his movements careful and controlled. Lisa gathered her notes and followed him toward the exit. As they walked through the corridors of the diplomatic station, she could see other delegates still chuckling about the presentation. Humans and their fantasies. She heard one saying to another, "Imagine believing your ancestors could fight entire armies alone." Jake stopped walking so suddenly that Lisa almost bumped into him. For a moment, she thought he might turn around and say something to the crystal beings. Instead, he took a deep breath and continued walking. That night, alone in his quarters, Jake pulled out an old photograph from his desk drawer. 12 faces looked back at him, young and dirty and exhausted, but still smiling. Behind them lay the twisted wreckage of what had once been the most heavily defended fortress in the sector. Jake sat alone in his quarters, the station's artificial night cycle casting long shadows across the small room. The photograph lay on his desk under the pale light of his reading lamp. 12 faces stared back at him from the image, their expressions tired but determined. Behind them, the twisted metal remains of the Zephyrian fortress still smoldered, dark smoke rising into the alien sky. His fingers traced the edge of the picture, stopping at each face as memories flooded back. The red dirt of Kepler-4 for to be had gotten into everything during those long months of fighting. It stained their uniforms, clogged their weapons, and turned their water supplies the color of rust. But it was the faces that haunted him most. Young faces that had trusted him to bring them home. The door chimed softly, and Lisa Brooks entered carrying a stack of reports. She stopped when she saw Jake sitting in the dim light, the photograph in his hands. "Commander," she said quietly, "I brought tomorrow's briefing materials. The trade negotiations with the Aquari delegation are scheduled for 100 hours. Jake looked up at her, his dark eyes reflecting the lamp's glow. "Lisa, sit down for a minute." She set the reports aside and took the chair across from his desk. In the months they had worked together, she had learned to read his moods. Tonight, something was different. The mockery in the council chamber had affected him more deeply than she had expected. "Tell me about the war," she said simply. Jake was quiet for a long moment, then picked up the photograph. "This was taken on Kepler-4 for to be. 3 days after we took Hill 57, the Zephyrians had built a fortress there that controlled the entire northern continent. Their own military analysts said it was impossible to capture." Lisa leaned forward, studying the image. She had read the official reports. Of course, the Battle of Hill 57 was taught in military academies as a textbook example of successful siege warfare. But the reports were dry, clinical documents that focused on tactics and casualty figures. They never mentioned the human cost. "How many soldiers did command send?" she asked. 12, Jake said. "Just us." Lisa blinked in surprise. 12. The reports said it was a full battalion assault. Jake shook his head. That's what they wrote afterward. The truth was different. Command knew it was a suicide mission. The fortress had energy shields that could stop any weapon we had. Automated defense turrets that could track targets from 5 miles away. The Zephyrians had 300 soldiers inside, with enough supplies to last a year. He set the photograph down and walked to the small window that looked out at the stars. They asked for volunteers, told us straight out that we wouldn't be coming back, said it was worth trying because even if we failed, we might learn something useful for the next assault. "But you volunteered anyway," Lisa said. "We all did." Every man and woman in the unit stepped forward. Jake's voice was soft, almost distant. "Tony Rodriguez had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth. Amy Nelson was engaged to be married the month after we were supposed to rotate home. Kevin Murphy was 19 years old and had never been in a real battle before." Lisa waited, sensing there was more to the story. Jake turned back to face her, his expression troubled. "The plan was simple," he continued. "We would approach during the next radiation storm. The electromagnetic interference would knock out electronics on both sides, give us a chance to get close before their sensors picked us up. Once we were inside the perimeter, we were supposed to plant charges on the shield generators and try to create an opening for the main assault force." "What went wrong?" Lisa asked. "Nothing went wrong," Jake said. "That was the problem. Everything went exactly as planned, right up until the moment we should have died." He sat back down at his desk, his hands clasped together. "The storm hit right on schedule. Our vehicles broke down 2 miles from the fortress, just like we expected. Our communication equipment failed. Our weapons started jamming from the electromagnetic interference. By all rights, we should have turned around and tried to get another day, but you didn't. No, we kept going, on foot, carrying our wounded, improvising weapons from whatever we could find." Jake's voice grew quieter. "That's when I started to understand what the Zephyrians couldn't wrap their heads around. They kept broadcasting surrender demands, asking us why we didn't retreat when we were clearly defeated." Lisa leaned back in her chair, processing what she was hearing. "The report said you used advanced human tactics to overcome their defenses." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Advanced tactics. That's one way to put it. Tony Rodriguez carried Corporal Dan Harris and Private Sue Williams for 3 miles after taking shrapnel in his own leg. The medic said later that he should have been unconscious from blood loss, but he just kept walking. How is that possible? Amy Nelson was our explosives expert. She took a direct hit from one of their energy weapons during the approach, gave her severe radiation poisoning and a concussion that left her technically blind, but she still managed to jury-rig charges from our medical supplies and breach the outer wall. Jake stood up again, pacing now as the memories came flooding back. Kevin Murphy was the first one through the breach. Kid had never fired a shot. In anger before that day, he took wounds that should have killed him instantly, but he kept fighting for 6 hours. 6 hours, Lisa. The Zephyrian combat medics examined him afterward and said his injuries were incompatible with life. Commander, what are you saying? Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at her. I'm saying that when humans face impossible odds, when everything seems lost, something happens to us that other species can't understand. We don't stop. We don't surrender. We don't know how to quit. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. The Berserker legends, the stories about warriors who couldn't be stopped. Not legends, Jake said firmly. History, suppressed history. He walked back to the window, staring out at the distant stars. After we took the fortress, after 300 Zephyrian soldiers surrendered to 12 humans, their commander asked to speak with me. He was a career military officer, fought in 12 campaigns across the galaxy. He said he had never seen anything like what we did that day. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that we were just doing our job, that we had friends depending on us, and we weren't going to let them down. Jake turned back to Lisa, but he didn't believe me. He kept asking how we could keep fighting when we were clearly beaten, how we could ignore wounds that would have stopped his soldiers, how we could function when our equipment failed and our supplies ran out. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of what Jake was telling her. The medical reports from the battle, she said finally. They were classified. All of them. The human government and the Zephyrian High Command agreed to bury the details. They said it would be destabilizing to reveal the true extent of human combat effectiveness under extreme conditions. But why? If humans are capable of this, why hide it? Jake sat back down, suddenly looking older than his years. Because fear is a dangerous thing, Lisa. Fear makes people do stupid things. Better to let the galaxy think we're weak and harmless than to have them wondering what we might be capable of if we ever decided to stop playing nice. The other battles, Lisa said, her mind racing. The Battle of Titan's Gate, the Last Stand, at Proxima Station, were those covered up too? All of them? Every time human forces achieved something that the alien military experts said was impossible, the reports were classified and the official version was sanitized. Jake picked up the photograph again. The miracle of the Outer Rings, 30 human Marines held off a Vextera invasion force of 10,000 for 6 days. The after-action reports were so classified that even I don't have clearance to read them. Lisa stared at him in amazement. How many people know the truth? Not many. Most of the soldiers who were there didn't survive the war. The ones who did were sworn to secrecy. Jake's voice was heavy with old grief. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. All those years of letting the galaxy think we're weak, while our own people forgot what we're really capable of. Is that why you didn't say anything today? When the ambassador was mocking human legends? Jake was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because those weren't legends, Lisa. Every story about impossible human endurance, about warriors who couldn't be stopped, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when everything depended on it. Those are memories, cultural memories of what we've always been able to do when we had to. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Lisa looked at the photograph on Jake's desk, seeing it with new eyes. 12 ordinary humans who had accomplished the impossible and then been erased from history. To keep the peace. What happens now? She asked. Jake stood up and walked to his closet, pulling out his dress uniform. Tomorrow, the Council votes on humanity's application to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. The Vexera are planning to object. saying we're not strong enough to contribute meaningfully to galactic security. And Jake straightened his uniform jacket, checking the reflection in the mirror. And I think it's time the galaxy learned the truth about human legends. The next morning brought a different energy to the Galactic Council chamber. Today was decision day for several important votes, including humanity's application to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. The Great Hall buzzed with quiet conversations. As delegates reviewed their notes and prepared their arguments, Jake sat in his usual seat, the classified files hidden inside his uniform jacket. The photograph from his desk was tucked safely in his breast pocket, close to his heart. Lisa sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had barely slept the night before, knowing what Jake was planning to do. The morning session began with routine business. Trade agreements were discussed and voted on. Territorial disputes were mediated. Through it all, Jake remained silent, his dark eyes focused on something far beyond the walls of the chamber. Finally, the council speaker called for the next item on the agenda. We will now hear arguments regarding the human application to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. This was one of the more controversial items on today's schedule. Several species had already expressed doubts about humanity's military capabilities. The Vexthera ambassador stood first, her insect body clicking as she moved to the speaking platform. Her compound eyes glittered under the chamber's lights as she looked around the room. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice buzzing through the translation system. "I must formally object to humanity's inclusion in the Defense Coalition. While we respect our human colleagues as fellow beings, we cannot ignore the facts about their military limitations." She gestured, and a holographic display appeared, showing comparative military statistics. Human forces were ranked near the bottom in most categories. During the recent border conflicts, human casualties were significantly higher than other coalition forces. Their soldiers required more medical support, more supply lines, and more backup than any other species. This is not their fault, but it is reality. The Solari representative joined the argument, his crystalline form pulsing with soft light. "The Vexera speak truth. We have analyzed human physiology extensively. They possess no natural armor, no enhanced reflexes, no environmental adaptations that would make them effective in military operations." More delegates began to speak. Up, the gas-dwelling Fluxy whistled their agreement. The armored Garati rumbled their approval. One by one, species after species expressed their doubts about human military effectiveness. Their own legends acknowledged this weakness. Added the Zephyrian ambassador Kethvel, his purple robes rustling as he stood. "Yesterday we saw how humans create fantasies about superhuman abilities, precisely because they know they lack real strength." The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Lisa could see the vote was going badly. She glanced at Jake, who had not moved or spoken since the session began. The Mentari collective representative raised a tentacled arm. "Perhaps humans could serve in support roles. Communications, logistics, medical support. Their technology is adequate for such tasks." "With respect," the Vextera ambassador replied, "the Defense Coalition needs warriors, not clerks. We face threats that require beings capable of combat, not creatures who need protection." The insult hung in the air like a bad smell. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even those who agreed with the Vextera felt she had gone too far. Jake's hands slowly tightened into fists. Lisa could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. The photograph in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest as he remembered the faces of soldiers who had died, proving their worth. The Fluxy ambassador added her voice to the criticism. "Humans may be adequate for peaceful purposes, but warfare requires physical capabilities they simply do not possess. Their own military records confirm this." "Their soldiers are fragile," agreed the Garati representative, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber, slow to heal, quick to break. "We cannot risk coalition operations on such weak links." That was enough. Jake stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire chamber. The room fell silent as every eye turned toward the human section. "Permission to address the chamber," Jake said, his voice Carrying clearly across the vast space, the council speaker looked surprised. The floor recognizes Commander Jake Martinez of the Human Federation. Jake walked down the steps toward the center of the chamber, his military bearing straight and the classified files rustled softly inside his jacket with each step. When he reached the speaking platform, he turned to face the hundreds of alien delegates. "You want to know about human military capabilities?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. "Let me tell you what really happened during the war." The Zephyrian ambassador, Kethvel, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about Jake's tone made him nervous. "The siege of Kepler 44-B," Jake began. "Your military histories call it a minor engagement, a successful example of human-alien cooperation. But that's not what happened." He pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display. The image showed a massive fortress built into a mountainside, its walls gleaming with energy shields. "This was your fortress, Ambassador Kethvel. Your people built it to control the northern continent. 300 of your best soldiers, energy shields that could stop any known weapon, automated defenses that could track targets from miles away." The Zephyrian ambassador stood up. "Commander, I must object. The details of military operations are not appropriate for this forum." "Sit down," Jake said quietly, but his voice carried such authority that Kethville found himself obeying. Before he realized it, your own military analyst said it would take 10,000 troops and orbital bombardment to breach those defenses, Jake continued. Instead, 12 humans walked in, and 300 Zephyrians surrendered. A murmur of confusion ran through the chamber. Several delegates began accessing their own databases, trying to verify Jake's claims. "That's impossible," the Vextera ambassador buzzed. "No force that small could overcome such defenses." Jake turned to look directly at her. "You're right. It was impossible. That's why your people classified the real reports and created a sanitized version for the history books." He pulled out another document, this one bearing the official seals of multiple galactic military authorities. "These are the actual medical reports from Hill 57, authenticated by your own combat medics." The chamber erupted in confused voices as delegates realized Jake was revealing classified information. The council speaker called for order, but Jake ignored him. "Sergeant Tony Rodriguez," Jake said, his voice rising above the noise, "carried 2 wounded soldiers for 3 miles after taking shrapnel that should have put him in shock. His muscle density readings were 340% above normal human baseline." The Solari representative's crystalline form flickered rapidly as he processed this information. Such readings would be fatal to any known life form. "Corporal Amy Nelson," Jake continued, "jury-rigged explosives while suffering from severe radiation poisoning and a concussion that left her blind. She worked for 6 hours with injuries that your medics said were incompatible with consciousness." Now the chamber was in chaos. Delegates were shouting questions, demanding explanations, accessing their own classified files. Jake stood calmly in the center of it all, waiting for quiet. "Private Kevin Murphy," he said when the noise died down, 19 years old. "First combat mission. He fought for 6 hours after taking wounds that should have killed him instantly. Your combat medics couldn't understand how he remained functional." The Vexthera ambassador's mandibles clicked nervously. "Even if this is true, these would be exceptional cases. Statistical anomalies." Jake smiled grimly. The Battle of Titan's Gate. 37 human marines held off 10,000 Vexera for 6 days. The last stand at Proxima Station. 43 humans against an entire Garati battle group. The miracle of the Outer Rings. Should I go on? The chamber fell silent. Many delegates were accessing their own military archives now, finding reports they had never seen before, data that had been buried for years. "You filed them all as statistical anomalies," Jake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "because you couldn't accept what you were seeing. Humans doing impossible things when everything depended on it." The Zephyrian ambassador finally found his voice. "Commander, even if these reports are accurate, they represent extreme situations. Humans cannot maintain such performance levels." "You're absolutely right," Jake agreed. "Under normal circumstances, humans are exactly what you think we are. Weak, fragile, limited. But here's what you don't understand about us. He pulled the photograph from his pocket and held it up for all to see. 12 faces looked out from the image, dirty and exhausted, but still smiling. When everything falls apart, when the odds are impossible, when hope seems lost, something happens to humans that your species can't comprehend. We don't calculate the odds. We don't measure our limitations. We just keep fighting. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the translation systems seemed to have stopped humming. Your legends tell you this is fantasy, Jake continued. Stories about warriors who couldn't be stopped, heroes who performed impossible feats, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But those aren't legends. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 hours after Jake's revelation. Word had spread quickly through the diplomatic station, and every delegate chamber buzzed with urgent conversations. Secure communications were being sent to homeworlds across the galaxy as governments demanded answers about the classified human military reports. Jake sat in the human section, flanked by Lisa and 2 security officers who had been assigned to keep an eye on him. The council speaker had made it clear that revealing classified information was a serious breach of protocol, but the damage was already done. Too many delegates had verified the reports in their own databases for this to be covered up again. The Vextera ambassador was the first to speak when the session began. Her compound eyes focused directly on Jake as she addressed the chamber. Commander Martinez has made serious allegations about suppressed military intelligence, she said, her voice buzzing with agitation. We demand full disclosure of these so-called classified reports. The Zephyrian ambassador Kethvel stood up, his purple robes rustling with nervous energy. This is highly irregular. Military operational details are classified for good reasons. National security, diplomatic stability. Diplomatic stability built on lies, interrupted the Garati representative, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. If humans possess capabilities beyond what we have been told, this affects every military alliance in the galaxy. Jake watched the debate unfold around him, knowing that there was no going back now. The secret that had been kept for years was unraveling, and he was the one pulling the threads. Dr. Karen Walsh entered the chamber, accompanied by several human medical officers. She had been summoned from Earth specifically to address the council about human physiology. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her seem almost fragile compared to the towering alien delegates around her. Dr. Walsh, the council speaker, announced, "You have been called to provide expert testimony regarding human biological capabilities under combat conditions." Karen stepped to the speaking platform, her hand steady as she activated a medical holographic display. Honored delegates, what Commander Martinez has revealed is accurate. The human stress response system is unlike anything we have observed. In other galactic species, the display showed a detailed cross-section of human anatomy, highlighting the nervous system, adrenal glands, and muscular structure. Under extreme stress, humans undergo what we call a berserker state. Heart rate can increase to levels that would be fatal in other species. Muscle performance can exceed normal parameters by 300 to 400%. Pain receptors can be completely suppressed, allowing continued function despite severe injuries. The Solari representative's crystalline form pulsed rapidly. This is biologically impossible. No organism can sustain such performance levels without immediate system failure. You're correct, Dr. Walsh replied calmly. It should be impossible, and it is, for sustained periods. But humans can maintain this state for several hours, sometimes days, when circumstances require it. She changed the display to show brain scans taken during combat situations. The human brain essentially overrides normal safety protocols. It releases massive amounts of adrenaline, endorphins, and other chemicals that allow the body to function far beyond its normal limits. The Fluxy ambassador whistled a series of notes that translated as disbelief. Are you saying humans can voluntarily enter this state? Not voluntarily? No. It triggers automatically when humans face what they perceive as insurmountable odds, especially when protecting others. The psychological component is crucial. Humans don't enter berserker state to save themselves. They do it to save their friends, their families, their comrades. Jake felt his chest tighten as he remembered the faces in the photograph. Tony, Amy, Kevin, and all the others. They hadn't been thinking about superhuman abilities or biological impossibilities when they walked into that fortress. They had been thinking about the soldiers counting on them to complete the mission. The Mentari collective representative raised several tentacled arms. What are the long-term effects of this berserker state? Dr. Walsh's expression grew somber. Severe. Most humans who enter deep berserker states suffer permanent physical damage, muscle tissue breakdown, neurological trauma, cardiovascular stress that can lead to early death. Many don't survive the experience at all. The chamber fell quiet as the implications sank in. These weren't casual displays of strength. Humans were literally burning out their own bodies to achieve the impossible. The psychological effects are equally severe. Dr. Walsh continued. Survivors often suffer from what we call combat trauma. Nightmares, flashbacks, difficulty readjusting to normal life. Many feel guilty for surviving when their comrades didn't. Lisa glanced at Jake, understanding for the first time why he sometimes looked so haunted late at night when he thought no one was watching. The Vextera ambassador clicked her mandibles nervously. How long has the human government known about this phenomenon? Throughout our entire recorded history, Dr. Walsh replied. Every human culture has stories about berserkers, about warriors who couldn't be stopped, about ordinary people performing extraordinary feats in desperate situations. We thought they were myths until we developed the technology to measure what was actually happening during combat. Ambassador Kethvel stood up, his hands shaking slightly. The reports from Hill 57, were they accurate? Dr. Walsh looked directly at him, every word. Your own medical officers confirmed the readings. Sergeant Rodriguez's cardiovascular system was operating at levels that should have caused immediate cardiac arrest. Corporal Nelson's brain showed activity patterns consistent with severe trauma, yet she continued to function normally. Private Murphy's injury report listed wounds that were classified as but they kept fighting. The Zep whispered. They kept fighting because their friends needed them to keep fighting. That's what triggers the berserker state. Not fear, not anger, but love. Love for their comrades, their families, their cause. The chamber erupted in confused voices as delegates tried to process this information. The Garati representative's deep voice cut through the noise. How many times has this occurred? How many battles have been misreported? Jake stood up slowly, drawing attention back to himself. May I address the chamber again? The council speaker nodded, though he looked nervous about what might come next. The Battle of Titan's Gate, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber. 37 human Marines against 10,000 Vextera warriors. The official report says human forces used superior tactics and defensive positions to achieve victory. The Vextera ambassador's compound eyes focused on him with laser intensity. The truth is that when the Vextera broke through our outer defenses, when ammunition ran low, when half our people were wounded, the Marines didn't retreat. They couldn't retreat because civilian evacuation ships were still loading refugees behind our lines. Jake pulled out another classified document. The Marine commander, Captain Robert Lee, led a charge directly into the Vextera main force. 37 humans against 10,000. They held the line for 6 hours while the civilians escaped. The Vextera ambassador was silent, her mandibles clicking rapidly. The last stand at Proxima Station, Jake continued. 43 human soldiers against an entire Garati battle group. The official report credits defensive fortifications and superior firepower. The Garati representative shifted uncomfortably in his massive chair. The truth is that the station's defenses failed in the first hour. The humans had no heavy weapons, no air support, no chance of survival. But there were 3,000 civilians on that station, including children, and the evacuation wasn't complete. Jake's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Those 43 soldiers fought for 18 hours with nothing but small arms and improvised explosives. They held every corridor, every room, every inch of that station until the last civilian ship jumped to safety. The miracle of the outer rings, the defense of Luna Base, the stand at Centauri Prime. Jake looked around the chamber. Every single engagement where humans achieved the impossible. The real reports were classified and false ones were filed in their place. Dr. Walsh stepped forward again. The galactic governments agreed to this suppression because they feared the implications. If word spread that humans could enter berserker state at will, it might destabilize interspecies relations. But we can't, Jake said firmly. That's what you never understood. We can't choose when it happens. We can't control it. We can't use it for conquest or aggression. It only triggers when we're protecting something precious, when we're facing impossible odds, when everything depends on us not giving up. The Solari representative pulsed with rapid light patterns. Are you saying humans are only dangerous when they're cornered? Jake smiled grimly. We're saying humans are only truly dangerous when they have something worth dying for. And we always have something worth dying for. The chamber fell into complete silence. For long minutes, no one spoke as the full implications of Jake's revelation sank in. Finally, the council speaker found his voice. This changes everything. Every military alliance, every defense treaty, every assessment of galactic security must be reviewed. The emergency session continued for 6 straight hours as the reality of the approaching threat sank in. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with urgent conversations in dozens of languages. Delegates huddled in small groups, their voices filled with fear and confusion as they tried to understand what an external invasion might mean for their worlds. Jake sat quietly through most of the discussions, watching as alien military experts scrambled to review their defense plans. The photograph of his fallen comrades remained tucked safely in his uniform pocket, a reminder of what humans could accomplish when everything was at stake. The council speaker called for order as a new figure entered the chamber. General Marcus Stone, the highest-ranking human military officer in the galaxy, walked down the steps with measured steps. His gray hair and weathered face spoke of decades spent fighting wars across distant stars. General Stone, the speaker announced, Earth High Command has sent you to address the council regarding the approaching threat. Marcus stepped to the speaking platform and activated a holographic display showing long-range sensor data. The image revealed hundreds of unknown ships moving in perfect formation toward the galaxy's outer rim. 6 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected this fleet emerging from dark space. Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of a lifetime soldier. Initial analysis suggests a force of at least 50,000 vessels, using technology we don't recognize. The chamber fell silent as delegates stared at the massive armada approaching their home worlds. The ships were unlike anything in galactic databases, sleek and predatory, moving with purpose toward populated systems. The Vextera ambassador clicked her mandibles nervously. What do we know about their intentions? They've ignored all communication attempts. Marcus replied, every probe we've sent to make contact has been destroyed without warning. Analysis of the debris suggests weapons technology significantly more advanced than anything we possess. The Solari representative's crystalline form pulsed with rapid, anxious light. How long do we have to prepare defenses? Current projections show first contact in approximately 4 to 6 months, depending on whether they maintain their present course and speed. Marcus changed the display to show galactic defense positions. Combined fleet assets from all member species, total roughly 8,000 ships. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. 50,000 unknown vessels against 8,000 defenders. Even without considering the technological advantage, the odds were hopeless. The Garati representative's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. General, what does Earth Command recommend? Marcus looked around the chamber, his eyes stopping briefly on Jake before returning to the assembled delegates. Total mobilization of all galactic resources, every ship, every soldier, every weapon we can bring to bear, and full integration of human forces into all defensive operations. The Fluxy ambassador whistled a series of concerned notes. After what we learned today about human combat capabilities, some of our governments are concerned about arming human forces for this conflict. Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but Marcus held up a hand before he could respond. I understand your concerns, the general said calmly. You've just learned that humans can enter a combat state that allows us to exceed normal physical limitations. Some of you are wondering if humans might be as dangerous to our allies as to our enemies. The chamber buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Several delegates nodded their various heads and appendages. Let me be perfectly clear. Marcus continued, his voice growing harder. Human berserker state triggers only under specific conditions. We don't choose when it happens. We can't use it for aggression or conquest. It activates when we're protecting something precious, when facing impossible odds, when the survival of innocent people depends on us not giving up. Dr. Walsh stood up from the human section. General, if I may add some context. Marcus nodded, and Karen walked down to join him at the speaking platform. The psychological triggers for berserker state are very specific. She explained to the chamber. Humans must perceive a genuine threat to something they care about deeply. Family, friends, innocent civilians, or a cause they believe in completely. It cannot be artificially induced through drugs, hypnosis, or conditioning. The Mentori Collective representative raised several tentacled arms. What prevents humans from viewing other species as threats worth entering this state over? Jake stood up slowly, drawing attention to himself once again. Because we've been fighting alongside you for years. Because we've bled with you, died with you, built something together that's worth protecting. Because when that unknown fleet arrives, they won't be threatening just humans. They'll be threatening everything we've all worked to build. Lisa watched from her seat as Jake spoke, seeing how the other delegates were beginning to understand. The man who had revealed humanity's greatest secret wasn't a threat to galactic peace. He was offering to defend it with his life. The Zephyrian ambassador Kethvel stood up, his purple robes rustling as he moved. Commander Martinez, yesterday I mocked human legends as fantasies. Today I learned they were suppressed history. What assurance do we have that humans won't turn this berserker ability against their allies? Jake walked down to the center of the chamber, stopping directly in front of the Zephyrian delegation. Because, Ambassador, you've already seen the answer. During the war, when human and Zephyrian forces fought side by side against common enemies, did any human ever enter berserker state against Zephyrian allies? Kethvel was quiet for a long moment, accessing his own memories of the conflict. No, he said finally. Even during the most heated disagreements, human soldiers never showed aggression toward allied forces, and they never will, Jake said firmly. Because that's not what triggers our response. We don't fight for conquest or domination. We fight to protect what we love. And after years of working together, building trust, sharing victories and losses, we love this galactic community we've all created. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this explanation. Slowly, the fear in their voices began to be replaced by something else. Hope. The council speaker called for a formal vote on humanity's application to the Galactic Defense Coalition. One by one, species that had opposed human membership just days before raised their hands in approval. The Vextera, who had led the opposition, voted yes. The Solari, who had questioned human strength, voted yes. Even the proud Garati, who rarely showed respect for other species, voted to accept humanity as full military partners. The final tally was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, every member species agreed on a military decision. As the session ended, delegates began forming smaller groups to discuss defense preparations. The Vextera ambassador approached Jake, her compound eyes reflecting genuine respect. Commander, my people owe you an apology. We judged humans by our own standards, not understanding that strength comes in many forms. Jake shook his head. No apology needed, Ambassador. You are protecting your people by being cautious about unknown capabilities. I respect that. The Garati representative joined the conversation, his massive frame dwarfing the other delegates. Human warrior, will your people truly stand with us when the enemy arrives? Every last one of us, Jake replied without hesitation. When that fleet reaches our space, they'll find 53 species united in defense of our homes. And they'll learn what humans have always known about fighting impossible odds. Dr. Walsh gathered her medical equipment as other delegates approached her with questions about human physiology. Several species wanted to understand how they might adapt their own military training to work more effectively alongside human forces. General Stone activated his communication device to contact Earth High Command. Priority message to all fleet commands. Begin immediate mobilization for external threat response. Authorization code Alpha 77. As the chamber slowly emptied, Lisa found herself walking beside Jake toward the human quarters. Commander, what happens now? Jake pulled the photograph from his pocket and looked at the faces of his fallen comrades one more time. Now we do what humans have always done when everything was at stake. We stand together, we fight together, and we don't give up until the job is done. Are you worried about the court-martial for revealing classified information? Jake smiled for the first time in days. Not anymore. General Stone already told me that classification orders have been lifted. The galaxy needs to know what humans are capable of if we're going to face this threat together. They reached the observation deck overlooking the station's docking bays. Below them, ships from dozens of worlds were already beginning to arrive as the mobilization order spread across the galaxy. Human vessels docked alongside Vextera cruisers, Zephyrian battleships, and Garati dreadnoughts. Look at that, Lisa said, watching the unprecedented cooperation taking place below. I've never seen so many species working together. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction he hadn't experienced since the war ended. Tony, Amy, Kevin, and all the others would be proud. They died believing they were protecting something worth protecting. Turns out they were right.